Hello. In this video, we're going to be looking at renaming steps within the query and also renaming the query itself and adding a description. So to start off with, we're in rename steps and describe query.xosx, and we're in the query output sheet. So to start off with, we've got this query here, which basically takes this table and it does a couple simple things to it. It breaks apart this timestamp into two separate columns. So there's a time column and a date column. And also we've got unit price and the quantity, so it adds a column called sales, which is just the unit price times the quantity. And all that is essential if we want to throw this thing into even a regular pivot table, okay? So pretty simple stuff, pretty boilerplate kind of stuff. But what we haven't done is we haven't renamed the query, we haven't described it, and we haven't really renamed the steps to make it meaningful. Now, in the rest of the videos in the series, I don't spend a lot of time doing this because I feel like when you're doing this in real life, you probably want to just sort of work towards a solution pretty quickly. But it's actually pretty essential that when you're done and you've found that solution, that you actually do this stuff to sort of add some documentation both for yourself. A month from now when you pick up this workbook and are trying to figure out, what the different things are and what they do. And also, if you pass this thing off to another person, you want them to be able to understand what it is you were doing. So, first things first, let's head over into our query. So, in reality, what you probably do, let's rewind a little bit. Let's pretend like it's a week ago when we built this thing. I'm going to click on Edit. So, it's a week ago when we built this thing, and we loaded the data. And we did a couple steps, right? Boom, boom, boom. And we got all the way to here and we said, okay, good, we're done. Now, once you are done, what you want to do is a couple different things. First off, let's go ahead and change the name of some of these steps. This is a pretty essential thing because this is what is going to let people understand like what each individual step does. Now, right now, it automatically applies names for you depending on what you did. So source is always go get whatever data you got. Add custom, that's when you add a custom column. But if you see it says add custom, it says add custom 1, add custom 2. Well, that's kind of helpful, but it doesn't really tell you what those custom columns are. So to start off with, let's go ahead and rename those things. So I'm going to click on this step, and if I look at the code, well, what have I done? I've added a column. Well, we already knew that. And I'm going to call it date. Okay, that makes sense. And for each row, I'm going to take the timestamp, and I'm going to convert it to just the date. So it takes the timestamp and just extracts the date part, which is that right there. Okay, great. So what did we do? Well, we don't click on this little gear icon. What we do is we come over here to the step, we right-click on it, and we click Rename. And there's no, maybe there is a best practice. I'm not aware of it. I myself favored the add call, so for add column, right? So I start off by saying, well, what did I do generally? Well, I added a column. Okay. Then I say, well, what is the column? And I'm just going to say date. Right? And I hit enter. So now when somebody comes in and looks at this, they say, oh, I see what this step is. They added a column date, and they can look and see the date column and say, oh, that's what got added. That's what got done here. And if they're down here on this step and they're trying to look back at what all the things are, what all the different steps are, they can see what this individual step was, get a better description of it. Okay, let's keep going. So we click on this right here. Similar to before, we're now adding a time column. So if we look at the code, we take for each row, we take the timestamp and convert it to a time, and we call that column time. So we took this timestamp, extracted just the time part, and got that right there. So again, we're going to right-click, rename, add call time. Oop, not add colo, that's not right. I'm going to right-click on it again. Add backspace, call time. Okay. So for this one, we now added a sales amount column. So for each row, we took the quantity, we multiplied it by the unit price, the quantity, we multiplied the unit price, and we got the sale amount. Okay, that's great, and we called it sale amount. Fantastic. So we're going to come over here, we're going to right-click on this, rename, add, call. Boy, I'm just all over the place. Add, call, sale amount. And hit enter. Okay, now I can look back and have a much better idea of what each individual step is, right? And now for remove column, if you remove a bunch of columns, you could probably just leave it as removed columns, but if you remove one specifically, you might as well name it. So we remove the timestamp column. Notice up here, we had this timestamp column, which is what we used to get the date and the time, and now we've removed it. So I'm going to right-click, hit rename. I'm going to do del call for delete column. Delete column, and we're going to delete, what did we delete? We deleted the timestamp. We deleted the timestamp. Okay. Reorder columns. If you could squeeze a description in here, you can do that. I think a lot of times reorder columns is just fine. People can understand what it is that happened. It's not something that you can really bake into one step. If you did it for a specific reason, you might include that. So reorder columns, I don't know, rename this to for viewing, for ease of viewing. But you don't have to. You can if you want to. So, okay. And finally, change type. Again, we changed it for a bunch of them. So, I mean, I guess I could go ahead and rename this to change type for load. Since this is the very last step, we're gonna change the type so that when we load it into Excel, all the data types are correct. I mean, I don't know. You can kind of leave that as it is. I'm just gonna call it this for now. That's just fine. That's sort of descriptive. And here at source, I would actually always make sure that this is at least called source at the beginning, because everybody that uses Power Query is going to know that source means, go get the data. What you can do, sort of dealer's choice. Oh, I guess you can't. Never mind. I'm sorry. You cannot rename this first step. Interesting. Well, nope, can't rename it. So if you try and click on it, it will not let you do it. Okay. So good. Now we've renamed all the steps. So if somebody's coming in here, they can, especially if there's like 2 or 3, pages of these steps, they can sort of see what's happening along the way. They can sort of follow along with the code. Now what we have to do is we have to rename the query, because right now it's just called query rename steps and describe, which sort of is not a meaningful name. That's describing what we're doing in the video, not what the query does. So you want to name it something that people can look at it, and you can look at it and know what's going on. So I always preface it with QRY for query. That way you can distinguish it between tables and other things like that, which you can prefix with TBL or something. You don't have to. You absolutely do not have to. I like to, though, if you're working with a lot of different kinds of objects. So I'm going to call this query. Well, let's see. What do? We're prepping the sales table, prep sales, and we're prepping it for a pivot table. That's the purpose of this query. Okay. You could do a lot of things. You could maybe have a query that does something else, and you'd name it something else, but this is what we do, so we're going to name it this. Click enter. And now when we're all done, I'm going to click on add properties, or all properties, and see I've got the name that I had before, but I've also got a description here. Now, this isn't going to be useful here. In fact, let me just show you this way. So I'm going to hit cancel. You can modify that here. You could add a description here. Where it becomes useful, let's go ahead and click close and load. Click close and load is when you click on here and you right click and you get the properties. Here's where you see that same description, just like before. Now, if there's only one query, it's less important, but if there's like 20 of these things, having a good name and a description of what it does is really helpful to understand what's happening, especially if you're picking up a workbook that somebody else has done, or you're handing this off to somebody else to try and figure out what you've done. So let's see, what did we do in this query? So this preps the data from the workbook sales table for use in a pivot table. For use in a pivot table. Okay. Now let's see. It splits the time stamp into time and date, as well as creating a sale amount column. Okay, since what we did in this particular query is kind of small, I can go ahead and add more or less every step into this second sentence. If you had I don't know, something with 30 steps in it, you probably wouldn't want to describe one by one all the different steps, but you want to describe in general what it is you were trying to do and the general approach that you took. And that way, click OK. If you've got multiple queries, you can always just click on one of them, go to properties, and get that description to figure out what it is that query does. And that really absolutely is the best practice. Again, I don't spend a lot of time doing this in the other videos, mainly because in real life, when you're building the queries, you kind of move kind of quick. But it is absolutely essential that when you're done doing that building, you go back and you rename all those steps, and you then rename the query and add a description. That way, it's much easier to understand what's going on in the future. That's very definitely a best practice. All right, well, I do hope that was helpful, and I will see you next video.